From massive perk overhauls to game-changing quality of life features, here are some of the best changes from Dead by Daylight history. Number 1, base kit borrowed time. This is a feature that we asked for years. I know many of you watching probably weren't even around when this feature was implemented, but back in the day, you wouldn't get endurance after being unhooked, so the killer could instantly down you if a survivor just unhooked you. Of course, this was completely imbalanced and very, very broken. Let's say you were solo queuing and a teammate goes to get the unhook on you. There's nothing you could have done, and the killer just downs you right after the unhook takes place. So of course, this was a fantastic addition to the game to make this extremely cringe tactic of farming a survivor off the hook to be gone. Number 2, the iridescent shard reduction. Now this actually happened pretty recently. I want to say it was within the past year, but everyone knows that this game is absolutely atrocious for new players because they have to spend so much time and money to unlock characters and to get their perks. And now there's like 50 plus characters in the entire game and 200 plus perks or something crazy. So obviously something needed to be done because every single character, aside from the licensed ones, cost 9,000 iridescent shards. 9,000 Iri shards would take so long to get. Granted, it is possible, and that's what I did as well. I personally unlocked every non-licensed character with Iri shards, but it took me 2,000 hours to do so. So obviously the price of these characters needed to change. So Behavior decided to do a 50% discount for every single original character up to chapter 27, Tools of Torment. And now instead of costing 9,000 shards, they cost 4,500. So yes, this is obviously a fantastic change, but I do think that they could go even further with this change. Let's take a look at how Rainbow Six Siege does their pricing. I think this model would work perfectly for DBD. Essentially how it works is that the character becomes cheaper the older they are. So in this game, their version of iridescent shards is called Renown. And if you're buying a new operator that just came out, it would cost 25,000 Renown. But then when that operator has been out for a year, it'll decrease to 20,000 Renown. 2 years, it'll decrease to 15,000, 3 years, 10,000, etc. I think this model would work perfectly for DBD to allow players to get a better head start at the beginning of their DBD career. Number 3, the end game collapse. Now you might be thinking, why is the end game collapse on here? Hasn't it always been in the game? No, this was actually an additional thing that the devs added to make the end game a little more interesting and to prevent situations where people could hold the game hostage. The end game collapse was introduced just a little bit after the Plague came out, and it was such a well implemented idea that's now a core fundamental of the DBD gameplay loop, and without it, this game would be so different. And not only was it a cool gameplay mechanic, it has sick animations when you die to the end game collapse. Like, this is more brutal than some of the Moris that we have in this game. Number 4, the introduction of LTMs. For years, people have been asking the devs to add new game modes to this game to freshen up the gameplay loop, and just recently, they've started to do that. Some of them have been hit or miss, like Lights Out. This was a little hit or miss, but it was a good start because this was proving that the devs were willing to spend the time to add an additional game mode. And obviously, as the game modes went on, they got better. So we had My Little Oni, which was a little bit of a gimmick. All of the survivors become extremely small, and the killer has to play Oni and is massive. It didn't last for very long, but it was really fun the first few times you played it. And then we got Chaos Shuffle and 2v8, which are two of the best things that have ever happened to this game. Chaos Shuffle made everyone load into the game with random perks, and obviously this was very, very fun. Trying to get use out of the perks that you were given gives you this exciting objective, and it also took away from the stale meta that everyone has been dealing with for the past 7 years of gen slowdown or second chance perks. And then we had 2v8, which was so good that it was bad. It was so fun having two killers on the same team that every single person wanted to play it, and it ruined the queues for pretty much every other game mode. So obviously there needs to be a few adjustments to make survivors more fun to play as so that the killer queue times aren't so atrocious. But in general, having new game modes to play, even if they're for a limited time, is very, very fun and is very, very refreshing. Number 5, the search bar. I don't really have to explain this one. I think it makes sense why we needed a search bar. Everyone's been asking for search bars for so many years, and they finally added it so you no longer have to scroll through like 7 pages to find the perk that you want. So obviously this was a great feature. And speaking of great quality of life features, number 6, the Blood Web rework. So this isn't exactly one change in particular, but it's kind of just multiple changes combined over a long period of time. But the Blood Web has been reworked into something much better nowadays, and it makes the economy much better, and it makes it much easier to actually get your perks and level up your characters. The biggest changes in my opinions were the addition of the automatic purchasing node, but also they reduced the cost of almost everything in your Blood Web by about 1/3. And every time you prestige, it no longer gets rid of all of your items and all of your perks. Now you keep everything when you prestige so you can stack up on those items and offerings. Any changes that can speed up progression in this game are obviously a great benefit. Number 7, the totem mechanic. Just like the endgame collapse, I think this was such a well executed mechanic that really fits within the gameplay loop of DBD. The totem mechanic came out the update before Hag was released, and it added this great side objective that expanded a lot of creative freedom for like perks and powers and such. I will say the state of totems and totem perks is a little bit sad right now, and I wish that they would be a little more meta because they're supposed to be these risk reward perks. But regardless, just the pure fact that totems exist and that they were so well implemented into this game and that they created opportunities for hex perks and boon perks and various other perks like inner strength makes this one of the greatest mechanic updates in my opinion. Moving on to number 8, we have the Deathslinger and Executioner rework. I'm specifically referring to when they got rid of the uncounterable mechanics of these two killers. These two killers were released back to back, and they both suffered from the same exact problem where no matter what the survivor did when they got to a resource, if the killer was close, they were getting hit. So as Deathslinger, if they took a window, he could just shoot you and then hit you through the window, or if you faked the window, since the ADS speed was so fast, you could just hit them normally. And for Executioner, it was pretty much the same exact thing. His sword was so quick that if the survivor took the vault, you could hit them with your ranged attack, but if they faked the vault, the cancel speed of your sword was also extremely fast, so you could just hit them. This put survivors into a scenario called a hit or hit situation, where no matter what they did, they were getting hit. So obviously, this was a massive complaint in the DBD community, and Behavior finally changed it so that the Deathslinger's ADS speed is slower, and the cancel animation for the Executioner is longer, so you have to commit to those actions. This massively improved the balance of these characters, and it set a great precedent because it showed that Behavior was listening and that they would learn their lesson and not add any other killers that would put survivors into a hit or hit situation where no matter what they did, they would get hit. Number 9. This one's small, but is a fantastic change. And this was the Nurse Special Attack nerf. Every time Nurse used to hit you with a blink, it was considered a basic attack. So this meant that every Nurse player could use perks such as Sloppy Butcher, Noed, various other exposed perks. And this just made her super strong because obviously so many of the basic attack perks apply and synergize really well with the Nurse's characteristics. One of the most notable and annoying examples was Starstruck. This perk made it so that everyone in your terror radius became exposed when you were carrying a survivor, and it would linger for like 30 seconds after you dropped the survivor or you hooked them. So Nurse players would run this with Agitation to make the terror radius bigger when they were carrying, and it was just such a broken perk combination to use on the Nurse because she could just instantly teleport to you and insta-down you. Luckily, they changed it so that her attacks are only considered special attacks instead of basic attacks, so now she can no longer use any of those perks, which yes, limits creativity, but she's still the strongest killer in the game and will probably never be topped, so I think it was overall a fantastic change. Number 10, the new Survivor HUD. While I do think that this new Survivor HUD didn't fit the game as much aesthetically, it had some fantastic quality of life changes that really narrowed the gap between solo queue players and Survive with Friends. Survivors can now see what their other teammates are doing for pretty much every single interaction in the game. They can see if they're being chased, they can see how far their gen progression is, they can see if they're healing someone, if they're opening a chest, even if they're doing certain killer interactions like trying to get their head trap off for Pig. This is a great feature to add to the game to give information to the survivors so they don't have to be on comms to make decisions. Obviously, it's not as good as being on comms, but the additional information is very helpful, and it turns solo queue games into something a little more manageable. I will say, I think this had the effect of making killer games much more sweaty, because killer games used to be so easy because 4-man Survive with Friends were very rare, but now that everyone has so much more information, killer games are obviously much harder. But I think this is for the greater good. I don't mind having my killer games be a little more difficult if it makes the life easier for solo queue players. Plus, being able to understand the Survivor HUD and know how to utilize it properly is a skill in itself. Number 11, the Hillbilly Overdrive rework. This was a pretty recent change, but I don't feel like I need to talk about it too much. The gist of it is that Hillbilly used to be a perfectly balanced killer that was really fun and pretty strong back in the day, and then they nerfed him to the ground by adding this overheat mechanic where if he uses his chainsaw too much, it gets disabled for a certain period of time. This made him feel extremely clunky to use, and years went by with this character being neglected until they finally worked the overheat mechanic into the quote-unquote overdrive mechanic, which was such a creative way to completely revert what they changed without having to like reprogram a bunch of mechanics. Instead of it overheating, now when you use your chainsaw too much, it goes into overdrive, which increases your movement speed, it increases your charge speed of your chainsaw, and reduces the cooldown of it. So overall, you just get a bunch of buffs for using your power, which is such a fantastic change, and whoever designed this change should be applauded, because killers should be rewarded for using their abilities a lot instead of punished for it. Number 12, this is a small one, but everyone knew this was coming, and this is the FOV slider. Obviously, having a high FOV is so nice because it looks amazing, and there was not really any reason to not have an FOV slider in this game. Like, in reality, FOV doesn't help you that much in this game because it's so limited from like, I think it's 93 to 103, so there's not that big of a difference, but it's noticeable enough to make the game just look cleaner and look nicer. Obviously, that's subjective, but that's why it's nice to have it as an option for every single killer, rather than it requiring an entire perk slot. Moving on to number 13, this is just better events in general. Obviously, this is quite subjective, and some people may enjoy the simplicity of the older events, but DBD events nowadays add completely new mechanics, and I feel like they did it in a great way. So let's go back in time to the original DBD events. These would essentially give you an offering, which if you ran the offering, it would change generators and hooks into special generators and hooks, and every time you completed a gen or hooked a survivor on one of the special hooks, you would get additional blood points. So it was just a nice fun way to kind of change up the scenery of the map a little bit and get some additional blood points. But nowadays, the special events are so much more complex than that, especially with the most recent one with the Twisted Masquerade. Now events will have so many different effects, like the Twisted Masquerade one had party pallets and Bluetooth hooking for the killer, and a bunch of random effects that could happen during the game, like everyone becoming 30% faster for a whole minute. Stuff like that makes it so fun, and on top of that, they did it so well because it was a completely separate queue. So if you didn't enjoy all of these changes, that's fine, play the regular mode. So you had the option to participate in it or not. But this event was essentially an entirely new game mode, which I really appreciate, and I hope that they continue to do this in the future. Number 14, I have to throw this on there, and that's cross progression. Obviously, this has become a meme in the community because they announced it in like 1996, but then it didn't come out until like 3 weeks ago. But regardless, it's here, and from what I've heard, it works. I haven't really seen anyone losing progress or anything, so it seems like Behavior really put in the effort and the work and the time to make this all work smoothly so that nobody would lose any progress whatsoever. So now you have shared progression, a shared inventory, shared currency, and shared DLC between every single platform. And this is obviously a great change and is purely for the players alone. Behavior could have easily not spent the time and effort to do this and been greedy so that if somebody switches platforms, they have to rebuy all of their stuff, but they didn't, and I really appreciate that they looked out for the players. For number 15, this is a tiny one, but oh my god, am I glad that it was changed. And this is the Shattered Square lighting. This map used to be the ugliest map I think I've ever seen in any video game ever. It was so hideous to look at. It was like a mix of this gross reddish orange and this gross green color, and it was off. Like I could not stand looking at it, and most of the community could also not stand looking at it. It was so unbelievably ugly while also causing a bunch of accessibility issues because obviously red scratch marks and red blood is not very visually clear when the map is red. So with the release of Vecna and his map, they changed the skybox and the lighting of the Shattered Square map to be a bluish green hue, and it looks so much better. It's one of the most beautiful maps in the game now, and I'm so glad that they did this, and I hope that they can do that for Eyrie of Crows too, because that map has this weird layer of fog / mist thing that's just very ugly to look at. Plus, who knows, maybe they'll see the good reception of this and add day / night maps. I think that would really make maps feel different without requiring a lot of work from the dev team. And last but not least, this might be a controversial one, but I'm gonna say the 6.1.0 meta shakeup, where they changed like 40 different perks. Yes, I know that there were a lot of issues with the changes themselves, like for example, nerfing Iron Will and Spine Chill and Ruin basically into the ground, but that's the entire point of a meta shakeup. Like yes, the changes went overboard, but it shook up the meta, which was the entire intention of what they were trying to do. I think this was such a fantastic way to freshen up the DBD gameplay loop and make people actually try new perks and try to switch out their builds. I think they should do this on a consistent basis, like maybe once every year, and do a meta shakeup of like 40 different perks at once to bring lesser used perks into the meta and to switch things up a bit. Or make it so that like once every month, there are 5 to 10 perks that just get a substantial numbers buff, but then those changes get reverted the next month. So there's always a consistent rotating cycle of perks that could be stronger than normal, as long as they of course balance it properly and utilize the kill switch feature if it gets out of hand. I think having perk variety is a massive thing for this game, and that's why people liked the Chaos Shuffle mode so much, and it would be a great thing to add to this game. Obviously, this game's been out for almost a decade, so there's plenty of other great changes in DBD's history, so comment below some changes I missed, and I might make a part 2 of this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like and comment a burger emoji in the comments below. YouTube thinks that you'll like this video on screen now, so go check it out and see if they're right. Goodbye!